reduce smuggling. I think that by themselves they would already increase the revenue take. In fact, if there is some adjustment in terms of lower income and corporate taxes, then they may be able to compensate for those temporary reductions in tax or revenue intake in the beginning. But the usual thing is when there's higher disposable income among consumers, then they tend to spend more too, and that would also redound to higher VAT revenues or VAT taxes, and therefore higher revenues coming from the VAT system. So yeah, and well, there's still a lot of leeway even in a status quo situation, because 2% to 3% of GDP is, 1% increase in the ratio to GDP is pretty high. That's about 50%. 50% increase in spending, government spending. That's quite high, but you know, that's a lot of leeway. I'm saying, and we don't have to consume that 1% right away. In other words, raising it to 3%. We just have to do it cautiously. That's my take.
For the next question, please state your name and where you are from.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, my name is Karen from Reuters. My question is actually related to the first one, because you said in your speech, you talked about a bolder pump priming. You said you're going to reverse the chronic underspending that we've seen in the previous government. Is it possible to give specifics or details to this? When you say pump priming, exactly where are you going to spend on? There was mention about hard infrastructure, but could give more specifics as to how you're going to execute that plan. Thank you.
Well, in the first place, we mentioned already that we are going to prioritize projects outside of Metro Manila. We are going to execute projects in the countryside and thereby create jobs there. You know, as you know, we have about 42 million people who are in the workforce, and the statistics show that about 5.7% of them are unemployed and around 18% are underemployed. That is almost, that's about 10 million people who are underemployed. And most of them, as we know, live in the rural areas. So it's very important that jobs are created in those rural areas if we are going to be an inclusive a government that espouses policies that have growth for everyone. So those are the areas that we will prioritize. I just went through a briefing with the PPP Center, which is under the NEDA, and I was really amazed that maybe 80% of the projects that are proposed are in and around Metro Manila. And I was saying that, you know, if you keep on spending money in that area, you're just going to further congest the Metro Manila area, and you're not going to solve the problem of unemployment and underemployment in the rural areas and secondary cities. Well, maybe Secretary Ben Jokno is here. Maybe you'd like to add something to that.
I look at the possible 2017 budget because we want to make sure that the 2017 budget is already President Duterte's budget, right? And I'm confident that the public infrastructure as a percent of the total budget, which is approximately 3.5 trillion, about maybe 800 to 1 trillion of that will be for public infrastructure. And that's not only the kind of projects that Sunny mentioned around Metro Manila, but these are small, medium-sized projects that are scattered all over the country. Because that's, we want to make sure that we don't underspend, okay? So we will not put into the budget items which cannot be implemented, okay? And small, medium-scale projects are easier to implement. So we want to make sure about that. And so that's the scale of public infrastructure that we want to do during the first year of the Duterte administration. So these are some like farm-to-market roads, maybe small water impounding facilities, things like that. Okay, school buildings. I think we still lack school buildings, and so these are going to happen all over the country simultaneously. Okay, not sequentially, so that it can be done in the year.
Next question, please. Again, please state your name and where you are from, and please couch it in a question form.
Hi, sir. I'm Prince Matulis from Philippine Star. This is a follow-up for Secretary Jokno. You said that you plan to spend up to 1 trillion pesos for public infrastructure. There's an issue about the absorptive capacity of the agencies to spend. How do you plan to address that? Thank you.
Well, that's a challenge to my colleagues. Right? They cannot complain that I'm giving too much money to them. Right? First of all, we would like to make sure that they will not ask for a budget that they cannot implement. Okay, that's like biting more than what they can chew. Right? So we want to make sure of that. Secondly, we plan to come up with a strong monitoring team, okay, to make sure that each department secretary is on the dot, and then they are following the schedule on time. And we plan to also to have the budget approved before the end of the fiscal year, so that we will start January 1st with a new budget. Okay.
Good afternoon, sirs. I am Ben Rivera from Philippine Daily Inquirer. Sir, I know that you haven't started work yet, so the numbers and figures, we can't really get it from you now. But broadly, sir, or offhand, what are the targets after the 6 years of the Duterte administration? Will the Philippines be already a middle-income country, low-middle-income country? Do you have any of those plans, targets? And also, in terms of growing the economy, we will be definitely at a much better state in 6 years. Can you share your plans given this, if you implement all this 10-point agenda? Thank you.
Let me talk about the target first, okay? As you know, in the last 6 years, the poverty rate in this country has not gone below 25%. Diba? Yes. It's been steady at around that. We will set for ourselves a target of reducing that by between 1.25 and 1.5% a year. And that will take a combination of the 10 points. It's not one item to do this. We have to do it together, and there's going to be a synergistic effect for that. Aside from spending the infrastructure budget in the right places where there are poorer people, as Secretary Pernia and Secretary Jokno have pointed out, we have to implement also the RH law together. We have also to create a business environment that will allow jobs to be created in those areas. We have to have a peace and order goal in the outlying area. So these goals are not single goals, but they are a whole program to precisely reduce the poverty rate by, say, let's say we are able to achieve 1.335% per year. By the end of 6 years, we should be around 16 or 15%, right? So somewhere around there. And I'll tell you, I believe that if we start reducing the poverty rate, that reduction, as the years go on, will accelerate. So we are hopeful that this 10-point program, and really this will require not only the administration's efforts, but certainly cooperation from the other parts of government, particularly the legislature, to help us work towards that goal. So as I mentioned earlier this morning, we are trying to build a consensus with the private sector, with the different branches of government, and even with the civil society, so we can work together to achieve that main goal of dropping our poverty rate, but by something like what will it be? By 35% from where it is now.
Let me just add to what Secretary Dominguez has stated. You know, the RH law implementation, vigorous and sustained implementation of the RH law is going to make a lot of difference in terms of reducing poverty. I have done some simulation. Just use, dividing the women into quintiles, 20%, no? Each group being 20%, so quintiles. I have simulated, suppose the poorest quintile of couples, because it takes a couple to procreate. Suppose the poorest quintile of couples were able to achieve their desired family size, because the desired family size of couples, poor couples, the bottom quintile will be the poorest. They are, well, their desired family size is only 3, but they're having 5, 6 children. So that's really a lot of surplus children in terms of their desire. So if they're able to achieve their desired family size of 3, then poverty rate would have gone down from 26% when I did that simulation to something like 23%. Okay, just pure demographic effect, no other, no other dynamic effects or synergistic effect from that demographic effect. If the poorest 40%, in other the bottom 2 quintiles, were able to achieve their desired family size, then poverty rate would have gone down to close to 20%. So that's just pure demographic effect from implementation of family planning, or the RH law as it is called now. So that is really good. That is why it's one of the 10-point agenda, the implementation, sustained and vigorous implementation of the RH law. That's really going to contribute to poverty reduction. In addition, as Secretary Dominguez has said, the thing about poverty is that when women are liberated of their childbearing and child-caring duties, then they're able to join the workforce and find some employment or get continuing education to enhance their skills and be more productive as members of the labor force. And not only that, because of fewer children, the investment of the family, just the family, per child is going to be higher for education and healthcare. And that's going to make the future of children brighter than otherwise. So this intergenerational transmission of poverty, which has been happening, and that is why it has been difficult to reduce poverty from that 25% or 26% rate. That's going to be stopped by this, by this dynamic. In other words, not just the pure demographic effect, but also the synergistic effect from. Because when women realize that it's nice to have fewer children, then they may even want to want fewer children fewer than their desired family size. So that is the kind of synergistic effect that can follow from this process. So cutting the poverty rate by 1.5 percentage point a year on average is achievable actually within 6 years, given political will and continuing implementation of a program like the RH law.
Yes, sir. Very quickly, since this is a very ambitious target, 16% by 6 years, and then
That was supposed to be our Millennium Development Target
right.
last year.
Okay, sir. But
It's not ambitious. We're just achieving what the other guys did not.
okay. But sir, also Dr. Perny also mentioned earlier that of course the previous administration also had made a lot of inroads in terms of growing the economy. Isn't there? I'm just curious. Isn't there any pressure to surpass or to perform better than them? Or yes. All around economic growth, reducing poverty.
I'll tell you. You know, the last election was a political exercise, right? Diba? High GDP growth rate, which was achieved and talked about by the previous administration, didn't get them re-elected. Did it? Obviously, that's not what the people want. The people want something else, and that something else they did not do, and that was reduce poverty rates. So, we are listening to the people. This is not, coming out of Mars or left field or what. This is what the people want. They want poverty rates to go down. They want their standard of living to go up. They don't really care whether the growth rate is 5% or 4% or 7%, because what they want is their personal lives are much better. I think that's what the last election showed. You know, this last election was very different from, unique in the last 6 elections, okay? Nobody had to die to get elected president, right? Nobody was a movie star. Nobody had to manipulate the vote, right? This is more like the election of Ramos in 1992, where the candidate was elected because of what he stood for. And what does he stand for? He stands for peace and order, no crime, no drugs, no corruption, and of course, inclusive growth. That is all he stood for. And that is what the others did not stand for. And that's why he was elected. So that's why our program is simply following what the electorate has spoken to us about.
Ma'am, please state your name, where you're from.
Yes, I am Miliho from the Philippines News Agency, Davao. So I would like to follow up on that. 80% of the PPP projects are cornered by in Metro Manila or around Metro Manila. Initially, have you identified the gaps where why other regions did not get a fair share of the funds for these projects?
I don't know why, okay? But I think the perceived problems are in Metro Manila. Okay, so that's why, and as Secretary Pernia pointed out, 2/3 of our GDP is around Mega Manila, right?
Yeah.
Around Calabar Zone, Manila, Southern Central Luzon, and all of that. So, I mean, if you're not a proactive government in pushing the projects out into the regions, they will all congregate around that Mega Manila area where 2/3 of our GDP is produced. So you have to have a government that is proactive. You have to encourage the local governments to come up with ideas and projects to invest in their area. So it's really a change of thinking. What do they call it? A paradigm shift, where the government has to proactively look at areas outside. I'll give you an example. How many airports around the country need to be fixed? I can tell you, Bohol is number one. Well, Cebu is being fixed already. Bohol, probably Bacolod is in terrible shape. Cagayan de Oro has to be refurbished. Even Davao is already reaching its capacity. So, I mean, you really have to start thinking about projects outside of the Metro Manila area. And that requires a government push, as well as, of course, push from the PCCI and the Mindanao area. Maybe you want to say something. You were mentioning something, Vic, earlier about projects in Mindanao.
Well, to add to what Secretary Dominguez has said, it's not surprising that 6 out of the 10 most depressed area in the country is in Mindanao. That's why there really has to be a paradigm shift in investment of this new administration. No? You might not notice that, but the agricultural infrastructure of Mindanao is really sorely lacking. That's why one of the major problems we have is really agricultural infrastructure to make Mindanao productive again. Mindanao has a lot of advantages which are not present in other areas in the Philippines, but because of inherent handicap of the region, it cannot maximize its production capacity. Lacking in irrigation, lacking in power supply, lacking in roads and other infrastructures which are related to the industry to really be productive. Now, the other problems we have in Mindanao is that we have a lot of resources here in Mindanao which should be tapped by government to generate enough revenue for the country, but we don't have the facilities. Classic example is our mining revenues or our mining resources in Mindanao. Now, if you need to mine in Mindanao, which is one of the biggest contributor to the economy, if you just do it right, they have to use offshore loading facility because the port facility is not available. Now, these are the things. We need to look at the things that we are supposed to be strong in and take advantage of that and leverage on the weaknesses that we have so that we will be able to maximize the benefit. Mindanao is a very potential area, and I hope one day, before this administration step down, we will eliminate the number of depressed area in Mindanao to maybe even 1 or 2 na lang. Now we have 6 out of the 10 depressed area in the country. So yun lang, I think we need to highlight, we need to put more emphasis into investment in Mindanao. I think that is the reason also where the desire of the President for a federal form of government lies. Because sometimes the investment that are sorely lacking in the area cannot be addressed because of priorities. Like what Mr. Pernias pointed out, 2/3 of the economy is in Mega Manila. Now, how do you change that? As what Secretary Dominguez says, there has to be a shift in paradigm. The government has to be told that investment has to go to the rural areas and the countryside. If that is not done, then it's not going to improve our take in government.
Any other questions?
Chris Laranio, Dow Jones. I just want to go back to the numbers regarding the poverty reduction, Secretary Peña, because I just did some rough calculations. So you'd want to take it down to 16%, and we're not what? 100 million now, growing at 1.7%, and over the next 6 years, that would mean requiring us to bring it down lift up about 19 million people out of poverty. Is that a correct number to assume, sir?
Well, from 25% to 16% is 9 years, right? 9 years, isn't it? 9 years. So 1.5 times 6 years is about 9, isn't it? It's about 9.
No, sir. I'm computing it because you said you'll bring it down to about 16% of the population, right? And we're growing at about 1.7% every year. What we're talking about is reducing the number of people, or basically lifting people out of the poverty line, and we're talking of what, 19 million people in the next 6 years. Is that a correct number, sir?
Yes, 26 million, or let's say 25 million right now. So we're going to bring it down to 16 million.
And that's already 9, sir.
16 million. So it's still about, but by that time, the population base will be bigger. So 16 million out of, say, 110 million will be what? That will be even lower, right? That will be lower than 16% because you have a bigger base.
Yes, sir, but that's why I'm talking of, you're basically just, if we just stay at the number 100, we're talking about bringing 10 million people out of poverty. People that now survive on less than $2 a day. Is that what we're talking about? Or am I just getting confused by the numbers?
We're talking about percentage point reduction.
Okay.
So about 9 percentage point from the 25%.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So it's about 16 million.
And as I've said, if you are able to reduce poverty by 9 million, poor people by 9 million, because we have about 25 million now, then 16% of, am I correct? 16% of a bigger base would be lower than 16%.
And as well, sir, you said that.
Well, I think
One follow-up question.
I think we can quibble on the figures, but I think that's a good enough target, bringing it to 1.5% per annum.
And on the PPP, sir, you said that Secretary Dominguez said that a lot of those projects are in and around Mega Manila. Does that mean that government will just allow the PPP to proceed and just focus on the additional spending, the pump priming, and just put all the money around outside Metro Manila?
Exactly.
So that's the strategy.
We've already said several times that we will not follow the last administration's strategy, where basically they stopped the PPP projects for 2 years, right? That's why the growth rate really dropped on the second year of the administration, because they didn't proceed with any of the projects. We're not going to do that. We're just going to proceed with those and accelerate more projects, particularly in the areas outside of Metro Manila. As Secretary Jokno has mentioned, I mean, things like just school buildings have to be, a lot more school buildings have to be built outside of the, what we call Mega Manila area. So we'll proceed with what is there, but accelerate, identify and accelerate the implementation of the projects in the outlying areas. After all, our president was an outlier, wasn't he?
Please stand up, sir.
Economy produces are permanent, formal, and well-paid.
No, I actually the graph I showed you this morning showed an uptrend in better quality jobs, and better quality jobs are just defined as salaried and wage workers, not own account or unpaid family workers. Those are the lower quality jobs. And you could see that it was on an uptrend, the salary and wage workers. Yeah. There was some improvement in quality jobs over the past years. We have to credit the present administration for that too. But well, yeah, we intend to. We intend to. Well, by generating more jobs and well, you know, the job market is there are two sides of the job market: the labor supply and the labor demand. Okay, and so the unemployment or underemployment is determined not just by the demand side for labor, which is economic growth. Demand for labor is from economic growth, right? Whereas the supply of labor comes from the quality of workers, how well educated they are, how much investment in human capital they have received. Then you have better quality of workers. And if you have a combination of, you know, smaller number of workers but better quality, and at the same time more job creating economic activities, then you know, the quality of workers would increase. The quality of employed workers would go up. The other problem with unemployment is also sourced from high population growth, because this population growth is the supplier of you know, future workers, and this has been, our population growth has been rather high, persistently high, declining a bit, but with a bigger base. You know, it has the number of workers, the number of youth joining the workforce has been increasing, and that's why our unemployment rate has also been difficult, or underemployment rate has also been difficult to crack or to address. Thank you.
Let me just add my own thoughts to the discussions. Quality job is multifaceted, okay? But let's speak about Mindanao and Visayas. Quality jobs in Visayas and Mindanao, considering the trust of the Duterte administration, can come on the following. Number one, on economic zones. If you will have to review your economic zones composition in Visayas and Mindanao, there are a number of economic zones here that are not either relegated to the background, not used or unused. Economic zones are game changer in any locality because they trigger hard investment and they create hard employment. Let me cite examples to you. Subic has more than 150,000. Clark is now going to 100,000. Camp John Hay is going to around 5,000. Let us assume, for the sake of easy computation, that there are in the country now more than 300 economic zones. Merong agricultural economic zone, merong livestock, merong fisheries. This has to be tapped. If you can generate, say, 5,000 employment per economic zone on the average, and you are not running after the employment composition of Subic and Clark, malaking parte ho yun. Ang importante lang dyan is may hard investment ka na, may quality employment ka. Ang importante dyan is how do you invite these foreign investors to come in. Of course, you have to marry this and integrate this with infrastructures, with utility composition. The second possible source of quality employment here is the SME. The President has appointed a Secretary of Trade and Industries that is a product of SME, Go Negosyo. In other words, yung small and medium enterprise. Imagine if this government, and this government is looking very seriously in providing capital funds for SMEs, and if the thrust is to go SMEs, and you could have a burgeoning of SMEs in Visayas and Mindanao, again, that is a source for quality employment. Earlier, I mentioned about transportation in Visayas and Mindanao appertaining to RORO, roll on, roll off. While basically this is a transportation tool, it could also be a tourism tool. Don't forget that Visayas and Mindanao is archipelagic, very archipelagic in nature. In order to have connectivity to the places where you work and to the places which you like to enjoy, then you must have connectivity. And the RORO component, as I said earlier, can be a triggering, a game-changing improvement in this administration. Bakit ho RORO? Mas madali hong magdala ng RORO dyan, saka mas madaling maglagay ng puerto kaysa gumawa ka ng completed loop ng railroad. But needless to say, I'm not saying don't go to railroad. You can go to railroad, you can go to infrastructures. At the end of the day, we can go into the numerics of how many employment generate this, how many employment is generated from this activity. At the end of the day, what we are saying is, this administration provides you with opportunities to have quality employment, a quality employment that lasts. And it will certainly be an improvement on the numbers which we are enjoying at this moment.
Maybe from the business community side, I can add something to that. BCCI have been very active in the linkage between industry and the academe, and also with the local government unit. A lot of times we find that the unemployment rate is basically linked to the skills matching. Okay? And as we know very well, in the last couple of years, manufacturing at least has shown better numbers. And these numbers can really improve if, like the present incoming administration, they're approaching this issue holistically. There's no one master stroke to reduce poverty, but all the action plan, okay, whether it be infrastructure, agriculture, which is a rural area, we have 60% of our population there. You know, improving that agri sector, it's you can imagine how much poverty you would be reduction of poverty that you can have. And in the area of education, now we're moving to the K-12. Of course, it's still early to see, but I think one time I was able to talk to Brother Luis Duarmi, and I said, you know, having this K-12 is one thing, but you should put some matrix as to what do we want to achieve out of this education. We want to be better relatively to the ASEAN countries in math, in sciences. Okay? So these are the things that all actions that is taken to improve education, to improve our infrastructure, to improve even the governance. and even the peace and order. People from, as earlier Mr. Lau mentioned about a lot of investments, parang it's more cornered in the north, Luzon. But I think a lot of businessmen are really looking towards Mindanao. It's a question that now, wherein with the new administration, there is the assurance of peace and order. Okay. You know, this thing means a lot. A lot of, businessmen put money wherein they are assured that, their life is not at stake. At the same time, wherein the labor force is cooperative. Our foreign direct investment is one of the lowest in the ASEAN countries. And I would like to see that with all of this pro-action, that we can at least increase our foreign direct investment every year, but by at least 20 to 25%. And you can imagine in 3-4 years' time how big the figure will be. We are now bordering 3 to 4 billion, while the other neighbors, Vietnam, Thailand, they're all in the double digits, 10 to 15 billion. And any of this investment that comes in really generate job opportunities. So I know earlier we're talking about figures like that, but on the agri sector, that in itself would really reduce a lot of poverty. On the education side, we have been talking to a lot of like the likes of Ambassador of Israel when they visited the office. And then he impressed on us that the Philippines, you should ask your DOST to create ecology of innovativeness. And they are willing to help us. They're very strong in the agri sector, the dripping irrigations and all the likes. And so we on our part, and I'm sure MBC does it also, we look for where we can improve our technology to provide jobs and add value. We have, our population is growing true, but really with proper education, nurturing, I think that's going to be one of our assets. Thank you.
Antonio Colina from Minda News. To Sir Pernia, sir, going back to the PPP, you mentioned in your statement that the performance of the PPP under Aquino administration has not been very impressive. Does that mean you would recommend changing some government policies or provisions of the PPP law so that we can encourage the private sector to venture into PPP projects, particularly in the countryside?
I think streamlining processes or procedures in getting PPP projects selected and processed for approval and review and approval would help in speeding up PPP, the PPP program. So, yeah, as earlier said, cutting red tape is one of the areas that the incoming government is determined, is resolute to address or to achieve.
Just some numbers. The average time it took to implement the 12 projects of the PPP in the last 6 years was 29 months. I think we can cut that down to something like maybe 18 to 20 months through speedier and more proactive processing of these projects.
To Sir Tugade, sir, do you have any plans for the SASA warfare and the Davao International Airport?
Yes, there are plans. In fact, there are a number of plans in the offing for the Visayas Mindanao area. We are looking now into the issues related to the Davao and Sasa issue. I understand it is in terms of what is the size, what does it include, will it include the reclamations of 3 hectares or no reclamations at all. We'll be looking into that, and certainly this issue on Davao Sasa will have to be resolved within the year.
question, please. Ma'am in black. She was first. You can go after.
I'd like to go back to the discussion on bringing quality jobs to the countryside. There was this Mindanao jobs report made by the World Bank, and actually it showed that only 20%. There's only 20% of the jobs available in Mindanao that are formal. The formal jobs in Mindanao only consist of 20%, and a large percentage are informal jobs. And when we talk of addressing underemployment and unemployment, do we mean to say that we address the informality of available jobs in Mindanao? And do we also mean, do you think that to end or to stop the practice of contractualization is one of this?
Let me explain maybe a little. Some of our friends from the media in Manila might not be familiar. You know, it's very unique in Mindanao. In Mindanao, we have three economies going on. You have the formal economy, you have the informal economy, and you have what you call the shadow economy. Now, the shadow economy is drug, kidnapping, gun running, and all of that. Now, the problem here, that's why when the World Bank made that report, they were only able to get up to the level of the informal economy. That's where you get it. You know, the formal economy, especially in some areas in Mindanao, is very insignificant. Most of the transactions are really in the informal economy side. So if you get very legitimate reports from your standard sources, you will not get much information there. That's the problem. Now, the major problem really is we have to create the environment for investment to go into this area. Unless we do that, no investors is going to go in. It's a vicious cycle. You will not be able to create jobs because no investors are going to go in. Now, what is even more troubling is because the shadow economy has become so big that it's really a game changer, no? Those people sometimes are very difficult to identify. One guy can wear 3 hats sometimes. So it's really difficult to identify. Now, unless the shadow economy is really removed, it will be difficult for us to improve the economy on those areas, no? So I think that's what the present administration is trying to do. We would really welcome if the informal economy ultimately will come out and become part of the formal economy. But at the moment, they're making it's more advantageous for them to just stay in the informal side. So you have to eliminate that by creating the environment for them to come out, no? Unless that is done, we will not have that kind of
microphone, please.
Because when, according to the World Bank report, the report defined informality. Yes, I agree with you, sir. But the report defined informality based on, I mean, it means that the workers are working long hours and receiving less pay. And do you think that to end this kind of thing is, I mean, can an end to the practice of contractualization of labor can solve this?
I don't know, okay? But the point of contractualization is when the president was talking about an end to contractualization, he is talking about endo. Okay, endo is 5 months and you're out, di ba? Di ba? But there are jobs that are really lend themselves to contracts. Like for instance, a TV show, okay? A TV show has a run of, I don't know, how many weeks does a TV show go? Please tell me. Does anybody know? Huh? 13 weeks. So that's the contract. 13 weeks. So it's okay to sign up for the TV show contract. That kind of contract is okay. Because, you cannot expect the employer to hire you for more than 13 weeks because the show might not be around after 13 weeks. The same thing with call centers. Let's say the call center has a contract with Walmart in the States to do processing of complaints. The contract is, say, 2.5 years. You cannot expect the employer to hire you more than 2.5 years, right? Now, there's also contracts that are seasonal. Like, for instance, sales of the malls during Christmas. The sales go up in Christmas, right? So they have to hire contractual workers. Pero yung hindi pwede yung endo. Yung you work 6 months now, and then they will kick you out so that you don't become permanent. Diba? That's the endo contract. That's the one that our president-elect is against. I'll give you another contract worker, like for instance, harvesting of rice. You need extra people to harvest the rice during harvest time. You cannot expect them to be harvesting, to be employed during the months when there's no harvesting. Diba? So, that kind of contract, that's a normal, natural contract work. That one is okay. But what he means is yung endo. Because if you're on an endo contract, how can you plan to pay the tuition of your kids 6 months from now? How can you plan your life? Besides, you don't improve your skills. Let's say you were trained you went to TESDA and you were trained as a, chef, right? Or cook. And then, after 5 months, you're out. They'll put you to be a security, janitor. Your skills never develop. That's why that type of contract is what our president-elect is against. Not the normal, contracts that are part of business. I hope that's clear.
I'd like to add to what Secretary Dominguez just said. I have a company in the IT field. So we do contract primarily because the agreement with the principal, like we have help desk or maintenance contract, it's good for 2 years or 3 years. We hire people, we train them. Okay? And of course, between the employer-employee relationship, there's a contract of 2 years. But honestly speaking, since we have invested in that person, the skill sets, before we know the contract is going to be expired, we're looking for other opportunities for him. Yes, it's true, yung endo, low-paying job, sometimes it's because they don't have the skill sets. But for people who really, on their own volition, okay, educate themselves, learn the skills that the industry is looking for, they have nothing to fear. We are always a shortage of people like that, although they're contracted. Okay? Because from the businessman point of view, as I said earlier, you have invested in them good money for the skill sets. Why would you throw it away? Okay? So we're always looking for new contracts. And chances are, the contracts are renewed. But since the principal cannot tell us that they work for certain companies abroad, and this is the contract that they have. So we will have to abide by that. So I think, adding to what Secretary Dominguez said, it really depends on the industry. Okay. But even the present law itself now, the endo is not allowed. Thank you.
We have last 2 questions left. You and me. For the others, we'll try to accommodate after.
Good afternoon. I'm Edwin Ismail. I'm looking at 2 political policies direction of the incoming Duterte administration. One is the peace negotiations between the government of the Philippines and the MILF, and on the one hand, and the GRP and the NDF on the other hand. And then the shift to federalism. Often the president says the allocation of resources might not be the same anymore if we shift into federal system of government. Now, my question is, how will these two major political decisions or policies of the government, the incoming government, impact on the way how we plan our economy in the next 6 years? Say, for example, if the negotiated peace settlement is achieved within the next 2 years, and the shift in the federal system of government might come in within the period of the Duterte presidency, how will it impact the economy, the short term, medium term, and long term?
So, sir, your question is how would federalism impact the economy in the short term?
How will these two political policies or political directions, federalism and peace, negotiated peace settlement of all the armed rebels, impact the economy in the short term, medium term, and the long term?
I think the peace settlement will be very positive, both with the NPA type guys and then the MNLF, MILF. I mean, if you are able to achieve a lasting peace between these two groups, I think investments will flow in those areas very quickly. Maybe some more quickly than others, because, you know, as after you do the peace talks, there's a period where you have to increase confidence in each other. It's not going to happen immediately, right? I mean, human nature being what it is, you know, that signed paper is has to be actualized. But definitely, the peace process will encourage growth in the economy. Now, in the second area, which is federalism, the plan, I think, is to hold, first of all, national discussions with what type of federalism is it going to be? Is it just going to be more autonomy, or is it going to be the French model, or is it going to be the U.S. model? So, you know, we don't know yet. But definitely, you know, as is shown here in Davao, if you elect good local executives and they manage their areas very well, like Davao has been managed very well for the last 22 years, you will see a lot of growth. So I hope that answers your question, sir.
Last question, please.
Sir, good afternoon. I'm Gabriel Binaday from Manila Standard today. Question for Secretary Pernia. Sir, since the Aquino administration has set the target of 6.8 to 7.8% growth target for this year, do you think that is realistic, or if it's not, what will be the realistic numbers for growth targets for 2016? And for Secretary Dominguez, sir, for the presentation earlier, we have suggested the expansion of tax exemption for the wage earners. Sir, how are we going to offset the foregone revenues for that? And for the DOC and BIR, what are our goals in terms of tax eradication of tax evasion and corruption in those agencies? Thank you.
Okay, let me start with that 6.8 to 7.8% growth target of the current administration. Well, it's not impossible, but you know, we prefer to be somewhat conservative because we will be starting a new administration. There'll be some adjustment, pains, not birth pains, but adjustment pains. And so it's not going to be smooth right away. We have to learn to work together as a team, for example, and try to learn the ropes of each of our respective departments. And then we have to also, we have to work with the president. And so there may be some adjustment hiccups, but I think I would say that I think I've discussed it with Dr. Jokno and Secretary Dominguez, and I think 6.5 would be feasible and conservative enough for the whole of 2016. Later on, we will, we will work up something with our econometric model. We have PIDS as an Philippine Institute for Development Studies, which is attached to NEDA, as a model, forecasting model. And so we'll see what that model will tell us. And then we usually compare with consensus forecasts of other reputable forecasting firms. So that's all I can say at this point.
Thank you. Your question was, let's say if we reclassify the brackets of the income. First of all, you have to understand, those income brackets were set in 1997. You know, when 500,000 pesos meant a lot more than 500,000 pesos now. If I'm not mistaken, Secretary Jokno was the one who started those brackets, right? In 97. He was the Secretary of the Budget at that time. Well, there will be a number of there will be some reduction in the revenue, but we're also looking at removing, for instance, a lot of the exemptions on the VAT. We have 2 pages, as I last read, of exemptions and zero-rated VAT transactions. You know, we have to take a look at those things. You know, in Thailand, the VAT is 7%. Our VAT here is 12%. And yet, they collect as much VAT as a percentage of GDP as we do. I think it's 4.2% of GDP, di ba? Something in that area. On a bigger GDP pa. So, something must be wrong with our VAT. Okay, and I think one of the problems is all these exemptions that we have to really be reviewed. So that's one source of additional revenue, ma'am. Of course, as I said, we will determine the strategy of doing the tax reform. Are we going to do it all at once, or are we going to do the easy pieces first, and then work up until we get more experience with adding more and more items in the tax reform bill? I'm tending to think, you know, maybe at this time we do the easy ones first and get those passed, like indexation of, for instance, indexation of the tax on fuel. Right? But the tax on fuel was set also, I think, in the 1990s, right? I think it's, what is it, 450 per liter? 87 ba or 97? 97. So they took it out from being ad valorem to excise tax, right? So but that number has not been adjusted through the years. And maybe now is the time to adjust that. Because anyway, the price of fuel is not very high. So those are the possible areas of revenue. Maybe you want to add something?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that need to be changed. As Sunny said, income tax, which was way back in 1997, corporate income tax, which, given the ASEAN integration, has actually gone down. You know, some countries have adjusted their corporate income tax. And then I think we should also review the perks given to government, somewhat 200 investment incentives laws, right? We have to comprehensively look at this. This has been on the agenda for the easily last 2 decades, with not much success. And I think because there are some vested interests here. For example, some telcos enjoyed perks. Okay. Can you imagine that? Smart and Globe enjoying some perks from government incentives. They're so profitable, yet they get some incentives. And one estimate is that we are losing something like 1% of GDP for this incentives. So there are many things we can do. The price of petroleum products has gone down from $135 to now around $50. We lost a lot of revenues from that. And as a nation, we should not be enjoying cheap oil. Okay? We should be conserving or in fact saving on the use of oil. So taxation is important for achieving that so that we achieve two things. One, we use fuel oil more efficiently. Second, we collect more taxes from fuel oil, or at least not lose a lot of taxes from fuel oil.
To wrap up, just another one.
Sorry, just wanted to ask, since we're talking about taking PPPs more to the rural areas, will we also see a shift in the budget? My question is with Mr. Diokno. Will we see a shift in the budget since the budget is heavily allocated to Luzon, so we're also seeing more of that allocated to perhaps Visayas and Mindanao?
Now, let's not be enamored with PPP. PPP, small and medium-sized projects that will go to the rural areas cannot be done on a PPP basis, right? Number one. In fact, I don't agree with using PPP as a mode for providing school buildings, right? You remember, they have 2 PPP projects for school buildings, and only 2 major construction firms benefited from that. And then, so that shows you that the possible employment effect is very much tempered because of the PPP approach, okay? So there are many projects that can be done in the countryside without using PPP, because that causes a lot of delay. So that's number one. And on the allocation of the budget, you know that we are focusing on public infra, education, and agriculture. And by its nature, because we're focusing on agriculture and investment human capital, naturally we'll be spending more money in rural areas where there are more poor people and where agriculture is pervasively used. Okay.
Room for one more?
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Cliff Benson from Nikkei. So, sir, sorry, Secretary Bello is not here, but my question is about OFW. What is the government's policy on OFWs, and what kind of how do we see the labor exploitation policy by 2022, maybe?
Yeah. Actually, I've written papers on expressing my downbeat attitude toward OFWs, because it's not so steady, it's not so stable, it's so subject to geopolitical swings, you know, and whatever disturbances there are in the countries of destination, our OFWs get into trouble and we have to plane them back. And you know that many of our OFWs, especially the female members of OFWs, tend to be abused, and even from getting contracts or from recruiters, they're already abused. And then when they're in place at their employment in the employment destination, it's not a happy situation for our OFWs, especially the lower level OFWs. And I think many of them would rather work here. So I think the policy is we would like, my preference would be that we make overseas employment an option, not a necessity. Well, that has been a cliche. That has been said several times. But I guess if we can create more jobs here in the domestic economy, then the motivation of our, countrymen to go abroad would be diminished. So I think the policy ought to be to try to generate more jobs here, so that the desire to go abroad will be lessened. And there's also a problem here with children being displaced, and they lack attention, and they get into drugs. Yeah, it's a social cost. It's a huge social cost, this OFW system. If you recall, in South Korea and Thailand, these were very temporary stopgap measures to in the early stages of their development, because they wanted to address their employment problems. But now there's no more urgency for them, or necessity, or need for these countries to have overseas workers. We should try to achieve that kind of situation as soon as possible.
Thank you, sir. So that's wrap up. No more questions. They have other engagements. So we thank our media friends for coming, and we also thank our secretary.